journey for the final day of LEC Super Week. We've seen a lot of back and forth over the first 2 days, and we'll cover all of the major takeaways in today's Ready Check. I am Sjokz, and you know what? I am such a lucky grandma because I am joined by Medi, Vedi, by Vedius, and by Medic. It is really a treat. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure
it's going to be
be
a
here.
lot of fun. We got some fun stuff on the docket today, don't we, Medic?
Yes, Fun Day Sunday. That's what I've heard. So I'm looking forward to it.
Sunday. Plus, England is ahead in
1-0, let's go.
Let's
they
go.
They were ahead 10 minutes ago. When I
Okay,
last
they might
checked.
not be
So,
ahead
yeah, they
right
could be
now.
losing
Please
right now.
don't let Medic know before Ready Check is over so he doesn't tilt. Anyway, let's take a look at the standings. Rogue are joined by surprise teams, Astralis and Misfits in first place. Medic, this is not the top three I had expected.
Yeah, truly a shock to see Astralis up at the top there. Obviously, they are going to the moon. It took them until week 4 in spring to pick up their second win, so I'm very surprised that they've been able to do it in only 2 games.
Meanwhile, Fnatic sitting at the bottom of the standings to the surprise of no one. If anyone's been following Fnatic for a while, they usually struggle at the beginning of many seasons, and it looks like that right now they're still finding their form. Hopefully, though, they will be able to bring it together because we're seeing glimpses of promise from this roster, but so far things are not clicking for them.
Yeah, a big glimpse in their first game versus Misfits to open up the week. Fantastic early game, but they did end up losing to the Bunnies, and Misfits are undefeated so far, 2-0 with a lot of late game emphasis in their games. Not really the early game being the strong point so far.
Exactly that. I think that Misfits right now are focusing on a lot more on late game team fights and just playing around objectives. And I think that the current meta is very much focused on this team fight style. So I think that it's a strategy that has worked and can continue to work. The question is, against stronger teams like Rogue, that weak early game, how much more can it be punished? For now, they don't have to worry about it because their late game team fighting is looking good, and their mid laner is definitely standing out tall.
Yeah, VTO is absolutely popping off. I think Vander as well, a bit of an unsung hero on this lineup. But Astralis also undefeated. They were up against SK and XL. They won both of those games. And some might say, oh, well, you know, XL or SK, they had a struggle getting into the playoffs. But these are important wins for Astralis, a team that has not ever started this good in the start of a season.
Yeah, I think it's very promising for Astralis, and because they kept the same roster from spring, I'm glad to see some development within that as well. Magic Felix is really starting to shine as part of this team, and of course the Akali being so strong at the moment has helped him out a bit. My concern for them is when they start to face the higher tier teams. Today they play up against Mad Lions. If they can give us a good performance, if not a win today, I will start to look at them as a team that could challenge for the bottom of playoffs rather than a team that is fighting for the bottom 4.
And I think that considering how they finished last split, that's definitely a strong goal to work towards, right? When you're competing against many of the bottom teams that you expect to be in the LEC, the fact that you're getting these early wins is definitely a promising sign. The only question is, can they continue to develop? Because that strong top side, as you mentioned, is definitely looking promising in this first week.
And can you keep evolving as the other teams around you are getting more used to their roster changes? A good example of that is Vitality, with some huge changes coming in to this season, and I think a fantastic start so far. They won their first game on day 1. They did lose to Rogue yesterday in a very hotly contested match, but you saw that they were going toe-to-toe at some points, Medic, and that is hopeful for Vitality.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited to see how this self-made and leader duo continues to grow throughout the rest of the season, because Leader has had a lot of investment into him from Selfmade, and both of them are very willing to be aggressive. And even though we saw SOT fall behind in a side lane early on in that game versus Rogue, he was able to fight back, had some very strong Gwen performances. So this top side of the map for Vitality is looking very strong.
Yeah, and we haven't really talked much about the bot side of the map either, but I feel like that there's still weapons that are available for Vitality depending on when they need to rely on them. They weren't able to shine in this game versus Rogue, but it was a thriller for sure. And as you rightly said, SLT is a player that I personally have my eyes on because I think that he has been performing above my initial expectations.
And let's also not forget to talk about Rogue. They did go 2-0, and I guess it's because we expected it in a way. They were the finalists, so we weren't expecting them to drop a game. But I think it's interesting that there was a competitiveness to that game versus Vitality.
Yeah, I really think when you saw them getting a 6,500, 7,000 gold lead in the mid game, that game should have been done and dusted for Rogue. Like, you expect them to be able to close from that situation. So I was a little surprised that Vitality were able to fight back, and you have to give credit to Vitality for finding the fights that they did, but also perhaps a few jitters in the Rogue team fighting that kind of let them down yesterday.
Yeah, we'll see.
I personally think that they ran into a Gwen.
Okay.
But you couldn't not run into the Gwen and win the game.
Just kind of avoid the Gwen.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, easier said than done, but yeah, I think that Rogue's still looking good. We'll see if they let that Gwen through again today, though.
And we'll see if there's an Akali in their games, because EU Akali, man, it's been absolutely crazy. I mean, maybe the Champions is incredibly strong, but like, tell me why and why it is so strong in the LEC.
Well, I think that Akali, since the MSI patch, has very quickly risen in prominence, largely because of the Riftmaker changes. For a long time, Akali struggled with atomization, not really knowing what worked best for her. But now that Riftmaker is so much easier to get online with the changes that have happened, it seems to really give Akali a very powerful one-item spike. And with the compositions earlier, it seems to work very well.
Yeah, the fact that we have so many squishy teams at the moment, you're not seeing any outright tanks. At most, maybe an Udyr in the jungle or like an Alistar Leona bot lane. So the AD carry squishy, the top lane squishy, the jungle squishy. Akali, all she needs is 1 or 2 kills to pop off. So if she can find an early skirmish and burst a couple of these people down with a Riftmaker, she can really start snowballing the game.
Yeah, that's what we've seen in a couple of these games, really getting down to the mid-game to late-game team fights. Akali has made a huge impression so far, but so have some of the other players piloting her. And Medic, you've looked at 3 standout individuals in the mid lane so far.
Yes, I have. Get out of the way, Vedi. I need to be over here. Europe mid lane is a match made in heaven, and with Humanoid and Larson challenging Caps for his title of best mid in the region, I want to focus on some of the new players who are going to be the next wave of great EU mids. First off, the story of Vedius. It's a bit of an odd one because after an explosive start in spring, he really struggled to impact as the season went on. If you banned Zoe, it seemed like you neutered the Misfits mid lane totally. In the last few games of spring, Misfits began to draw Vedius out of his Zoe Syndra bubble, and he started to see success. Success that has now seemed to carry over into summer. So far, Vedius has had 2 impressive games, and although everyone will focus on his 11-2-4 Akali versus Fnatic, his victor game against SK was equally as impressive. Never dying, out-farming, and doing almost as much damage as his top and AD carry combined. If Vedius can continue to branch out his champion pool, he and Misfits are truly ones to watch this summer. Now for someone who has only been playing professional League of Legends for 2 years, Nuclearint. He has made quite the impression in his first week of the LEC. After a shaky start on day 1 against Vitality, I wondered if the rookie French player would end up living up to his name. Thankfully for him, and less thankfully for those who had the memes already prepared, Nuclearint showed that his name does not define him, as he bodied G2 yesterday on Akali, against Caps no less. With Abadage leaving for 100 Thieves, Nuclearint has a prime opportunity to prove himself of LEC caliber, and right now, he's doing exactly that. And finally, a Norwegian who needs no introduction. Leader has been skirting on the edges of the LEC for years now. This man has an ERL win, 3 second places, an EU Masters title, and has been to the semi-finals 2 more times on top of that. It's great to see him finally getting his spot as a starting mid laner, especially in a meta that suits him so well. Leader is the pinnacle of an assassin player, and we're really starting to see him shine. So far, he's only piloted the Viego, but trust me, when he gets his hands on Akali, Irelia, Sylas, he is going to tear up the Rift. And teaming him up with an aggressive jungler is one of the best decisions of the offseason, in my opinion. If Selfmade and Leader as a combo can keep up this momentum, I'm expecting them to challenge come the end of the season. Now, earlier this week, Leader joined Dracos on the Euphoria podcast, so let's take a look back.
The other thing I want to talk about is this roster as a whole. I'm very excited for the roster as a whole, but I think I have to immediately talk about jungle mid. I have to talk about you and Selfmade, because I think when people see you two as a duo on the Rift, 2 words come to their mind. One is talented, the other is toxic. I don't think that other one matters, but I think it's funny that that's what they think. But talk to me about talking about jungle mid. Is this, when you think about how Vitality is playing, how this Vitality roster wants to play, should people be looking at you and Selfmade? Like, are you guys going to be the kind of the core of this team?
Honestly, I think it's kind of what first the people would think about, right? Like Selfmade, especially, he's been at Worlds. He almost beat top esports, was unlucky, and like he kind of got kicked from Fnatic, and then he joined the Vitality, right? And then I'm a super controversial player, and like even though it's negative, people are still talking about me, So that like it will obviously some people will be like attracted to it, like negatively or positively, and people will obviously look forward to it. But you can call it a core, but I think the other players as well can be a core as well. Like let's say nobody of us had the reputation, and we were only as players. Then I feel like everyone in our team could be a core. Like bot lane could be a core, top side could be a core, anything. So, but I think for sure people will still look at us as the core.
Yeah, and so when you look kind of at this roster to set expectations for the fans, I think Vitality fans have been disappointed for a few splits now, and it was easy to kind of discount some of the failures because Vitality org had, so many roster problems, visa issues, people, unable to play. But now it finally feels like from spring to summer, they've made these big adjustments. I don't know what Vitality fans want, leader. I'm going to level you. I have no idea, but I imagine it's not 10th place again. So what is your expectation for this roster, for this team? What do you see the highs for this team? Where do you want to be with this lineup?
I think everyone's expectations in this team, at least, is that we make playoffs. I think it's kind of doable, easily doable, but personally, I will always aim high when it's realistic. And right now, with how the meta is and how the teams are, I would say regular split top 2 is even possible. Even top 1 is possible. So I'm not going to set my expectations to that, but it's something that I wouldn't be surprised if it happens as well. But the expectations is like top 4, kind of top 5, top 4.
Expectations definitely seem quite high for Leader, and we will get to see him play later on in the day. But before we get to that, you may have noticed Gwen is quite the popular champion, not only here in Europe, but across the world. Extremely high presence globally, with LEC being the most prominent. So why is that? I'm going to run you through what it is that makes Gwen so strong. At first glance, Gwen may not seem that threatening. I mean, only recently did she just stop being a doll, and now she has some scissors. She's more like to hurt herself than you, right? No, you're wrong. Gwen is a split-pushing monster that also excels in teamfights. Now let's start with the teamfights. This first clip is from Genax and highlights how obnoxious Gwen can be. So we're going to have a really good focus on Genax specifically and what he's going to do in this fight. So Misfits, clumped up in this choke point, is going to dash in, throw up the W, and look at how much damage he misses. The Braum ultimate, the Victor E, Ezreal Q, Victor ultimate, everything is being dodged and mitigated thanks to the Gwen W. Yes, he ends up taking a little bit of damage on the way out, but he could soak up so many abilities because it provides so much safety. That appears to be a squishy AP duelist initially, but her ability to soak up damage without actually taking any damage is one main reason why she's such a good teamfighter. Her other big teamfight strength is her ultimate. So in this next clip, let's just keep our eyes on the damage coming from the Gwen. You can see that the initial crowd control comes down onto the Ezreal, and the ultimate comes through, but the chain CC allows them to chunk through the Ez initially. But then watch here, look at how much ultimate damage it does to the backline, just melting through Razork and Vander, just obliterating the Misfits lineup and looking like SK can actually swing the fight in their favor. Due to its long range and crazy burst potential, Gwen has so much damage available to her in the fights. But that's not all. Remember that I mentioned she's also just an incredible duelist? Like, here you can see that she is a level down, she's down in itemization, but thanks to the true damage on her Q, thanks to the healing from her passive, thanks to the damage that comes from her ultimate, and the low resets that come from her E, she just has so much dueling prowess and sustained damage that very few champions can actually out-DPS her. And even here in the same situation, out-leveled, out-DPS, it does not matter. And notice here how SLT also uses the W to mitigate the damage from the culling as well. She has so many tools at her disposal, and it makes her incredibly powerful. So Gwen, that creepy doll you were terrified of as a child, is now actualized in your solo queue games and is terrorizing pro play. She's strong, she will continue to be strong, yet she has a 0% win rate. Does that mean perhaps Riot should buff her? Question mark?
I mean,
Yeah,
logically,
that's, right?
that's what should happen.
Results-based analysis is what we do here in Europe.
Yeah. What do you make of it that Gwen is strong and even got paired up with like a Viego who's also pretty strong in the mid lane and at SK game, that it's 0-2 so far?
I think she is just still really powerful. Oda talked about a bit in the interview where you can shut down her laning phase, and that's what we saw happen with SLT yesterday. So if she gets to mid-game, if she gets Nash's Tooth and Riftmaker, she can take over a game. But if you can keep her locked down in the laning phase, you can stop her reaching those power points.
There is a possibility to shut her down indeed. Now that we have 2 game days under our belt, it is time for some Sjokzin statements, meaning they might shock you because that's in the name, and we're going to discuss with our analysts what they think of them. This is also a surprise to us. Well, not to them, not to me. First up, SK and Fnatic's jungle swaps are not the right call. Whew, spicy.
Is that spicy?
Is it?
I mean, SK
I'm asking
literally
you,
said
that's the name of the segment.
Okay, so SK literally said we couldn't find a jungler, so we're doing something that's going to be reverted at the end of the season. Treats is going back to support. Like he's very clear on that. And jungle Bwipo, I mean, he has had a couple of really good games, but why not just get a proper jungler in?
Oh my god.
Wow.
I think that's a bit harsh.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair. I can understand the argument, especially when you look at the success of both teams so far this split. But I think that, for me, I'm less... I think that it's not the worst decision ever. I think that they just need a little bit more time to figure out how exactly they want to approach the game. So I'm a little bit more optimistic on the change.
And let me isolate it maybe in the Fnatic case, because it's not that Bwipo isn't equipped to play in the jungle. We've seen that he's played the early games actually very, very well. Is it that Fnatic just needs more as a whole, another vision to be more successful in spring? Is that it?
I think it's just, if I were making the call there, I would say, let's get a really good new jungler in, because Bwipo is he's a world-class top laner on his day, right? If he plays top lane the way that he has done in the past, he can challenge anyone here in Europe. So I say it's not the right call because I think Bwipo is an incredible top laner, and there are good enough junglers in the ERL scenes for you to replace your jungler with a better jungler.
Hey, it is Sjokzin statements for a reason. That's why we play hardball. Secondly, Rogue will win the LEC title in summer. Need I remind you, they went from 5th to 4th to 3rd to 2nd. So
I think that this is a pretty reasonable take. I think you can make a very strong argument for it, especially when you look at how Hans Sommer is playing right now. Like, we already talked about him last split, and I want to bring him up once again because he is so good right now. I really do think that for the longest time, Reckless has sat at the top of the 80 carries, and right now you have a really strong argument for Hans Sommer to challenge or maybe even finally overtake him.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with Vedius. Even yesterday in their game versus Vitality, Larson kind of struggled a little bit in the early game. He was still able to get back into the game, and if Rogue are firing on all cylinders, especially with Hans Sommer being in such a strong position, I think they can get first. Will they get first? We don't know, but I don't think it's shocking to say they can.
yeah, but you have to then think of, I don't know if it said, did it say like champions or did it say first in the regular season? Because I think first in the regular season is obviously not even,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say not even a challenge,
also
but it's obviously very, very difficult, but it happened before.
They were also like one game away from winning LEC finals, right? Like they can definitely do it, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did.
So the statement was win the LEC title, and then I'm like, are you ever going to get a chance again where you're 2-0 up in the final against Mad Lions or another team? I don't know.
Yeah.
I think we have a lot of good teams in Europe. So
it's so
the thing is,
exciting.
I think that Rogue is also on a constant upward trajectory. Remember, Trymbi was in his first split last season, and now he's only going to get better with Hans Sommer in the bot
They're just
lane,
following the script, second
I
to
think
first.
so.
I get it. Okay, finally, Sjokzin's statement. Mid lane is the strongest role in the game right now. We can start with maybe in general and then at the LEC.
I mean, so if you're a jungler, they're all saying definitely yes. But if you're a mid laner, I know for a fact they're all thinking the jungle role is the most broken. I think that when we look at how the current meta is playing out, mid lane feels like the strongest role right now, mainly because of the champions that exist in the game. It seems like we're moving back into a solo lane meta, and the amount of agency that a lot of these players have seem to be just dominating and taking over the game.
I agree with Vedius. I think that mid lane is the strongest role right now. That's exactly what he said. And I think you just have to look at the way that it changed, right? Because it used to be you play for your jungler. In spring, it was all about set your jungler up, get your jungler as many camps as possible, get them ahead. And now it's the jungler sets up the mid lane or even sometimes sets up the top lane to get ahead, right? So I'm really glad that no one is saying support is overpowered anymore.
I was just going to say, support is actually still super broken.
Yes, it is, but we can ignore that. Support is like baby mid lane. Okay?
Even Hexflash was taken out because the supports were so good. Right? Conspiracy. Okay, well, we'll see how that goes today. There are, of course, some very highlight performances I think we've seen out of the mid lane with the Akalis, which maybe is tilting this opinion a little bit towards the mid lane. We'll see how things develop as we close out the opening Super Week with a lot of matches. Fnatic versus Rogue is one of them. Vitality versus Misfits. We start with Schalke versus XL. But that Vitality versus Misfits game, Medic, looks very, very dicey.
Yeah, it's super exciting, especially with Leader and Selfmade doing such a good job in the early game and Misfits struggling in the early game. I think we're going to see this clash of how far ahead can Vitality get towards the late game teamfights and how well can Misfits then play those late game teamfights again, because really both these teams have shown us a lot of strength at the start of the season, and this game could define where you're fighting for in the table. Are you looking for top 3, or are you looking just to get a playoff spot?
And can Astralis beat Mad Lions too?
No.
Well, there you go.
Okay, well, yesterday we saw Schalke secure yet another upset win versus G2, and Laure caught up with their mid laner before today's game.
Thank you, Sjokz and Nuclearint. Thank you so much for joining me. How's been your journey in the LEC so far? And tell me about this G2 win yesterday.
It's going great so far. Just the first day that was a bit rough. Early game we kinda like got caught, and it kind of destroyed the game a little bit. But the G2 game was really very nice to win, because like it's G2, and my first win in LEC it's against G2. So I was like, obviously I was a little bit stressful entering in the match, but just playing was in the game. It was like a pleasure to play and to win, of course.
Yeah, and you played so well, and I mean, you felt confident during that game. How was it being playing with the team? Because I was talking to Broken Blade yesterday, and he told me it was so much fun playing with you and Hire. So yeah, how have you been welcomed by the team since you joined them?
It was pretty good. The team so far is really, really nice, and scrims are going great. So like my confidence was just growing and growing the more we scrim. And yeah, it's been great so far, and we are looking to win against Excel to keep proving that we are not bad and that we can do great.
I love it. I love it. We'll come back to that Excel matchup a bit later. But I mean, you come from the Prime League. You joined the LEC recently. You didn't. I mean, you haven't been playing for so long actually in your career. So when you arrived in the LEC, did you have any expectations? And yeah, what did you think about the level from the players so far?
I had obviously like some fear, I would say, going to LEC. Because like I only did like one split in Prime League, and that's all. So I had some expectation, and in scrims, the first one I was like getting used, I guess, to the like to how people play, how the jungle pathing and everything, and the more we scrim, the more it has been great, and yeah, it's going good. I think I'm fine. I can for sure be like so much better, but it will come with the time.
Yeah, it will take time, but I mean, we've been over this in other interviews. You know the work you want to put in to be the best, and I'm sure that you're going to shine with Schalke. Last question for you. You were mentioning Excel, making sure that you get this W against them today. Excel didn't get a win so far in LEC Summer, so how do you make sure it's a Schalke win in the end again?
To make sure it's a Schalke win, I think we just have to play good and to win, like hitting Nexus. So I think it's a pretty simple plan. But yeah, I mean, we will just play our game and our composition and everything, and the game will just we will just play the game, I guess.
Okay, play with your strength and play with no fear, which is what you need. I hope you can shine again today. Nuclearint, thank you so much for the interview, and good luck against Excel today.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And Sjokz, back to you.
Thank you very much, Laure, and thank you very much as well, Nuclearint. We didn't really get to talk that much about Schalke so far. We had some other segments in the previous day, so I would like to take some time to talk about the team and the changes and how we feel about them. Yesterday they beat G2, and I think it was almost an afterthought because we were memeing and saying, oh, G2 always lose to Schalke, but that's a huge deal. Let's look at how they stepped into this summer season. They ended the spring season while getting to the playoffs handily, I should say, in fourth place, rather. Damn, that didn't happen. In fourth place, I can't. In fourth place, and they were very successful. They even 3-0'd Fnatic in that lower bracket. Then they got knocked out versus Rogue, which was the finalist. And the changes came a bit out of left field. I wouldn't say for the mid lane due to Abbedagge leaving, but especially in the jungle.
Yeah, I think that Schalke had a very clear identity last split. And Medic and I talked about it a little bit at the beginning of their first game, which is that they were very teamfight focused. We saw a very defined play style that, we were debating, were they getting a little figured out when they got into playoffs? But what we saw was that English is not our first language today. And Broken Blade was a player, I think he alongside Limit were two that really stepped up, came in the playoffs. And I remember Limit's Alistair in particular having such huge impact when it came to actually setting up a lot of the plays and allowing them to win out on team fights. And I think that Gilius was just someone that offered aggression, someone that was willing to pull the trigger, someone that was willing to say, let's start the fights and let's go, and could follow up on a lot of the initiations from Limit. And so the reason why we were surprised to see this change was it felt like that, yes, okay, the loss of Abbedagge you kind of just have to make the best out of that situation. But to change Gilius out was a little surprising. And especially after the first game we saw from Kire, things were not looking super positive for the team.
I will say there was historical precedent for this. In 2019, Memento got swapped out for Trick. In 2020, Lurox got swapped out for Gilius. Schalke seemed to like swapping their jungler from spring into summer, but obviously it was a little bit surprising when Gilius had been so good.
Yeah, we saw in the first game a comfort pick coming out of Kire, I think also to make him feel as comfortable as possible on that Talia, but then on the Xin Zhao yesterday, it was a completely different story. So let's talk a bit about the players that were, I think, most impactful, especially versus G2. Broken Blade had a huge game on that Nocturne versus Wonder. So, you know, that's helping. Then Nuclearint also keeping his own. He doesn't have the best laning stats. He also did in EU Masters, but that isn't necessarily a win condition. You need to be able to put the damage numbers out and work with your team later in the game, and that's what happened.
Yeah, honestly, I was surprised, because typically I think that Zed is a pretty good matchup into Nocturne, and the fact that Broken Blade was able to outperform Wonder to this degree really sets the expectation that he is a top laner that you have to keep your eyes on. He was already very talented last split, but I think there was debate around if he was actually in the top 3 conversation, but he's coming into the beginning of this split very strong, and this play in particular was massive for Schalke and allowed them to solidify the game win.
This was nuts.
And I think alongside that, it was the combination of Kire with Broken Blade and Nuclearint that really helped them shine. Here you can see Kire getting the Crescent Guard off, knocking G2 all back into Nuclearint, who can then get the perfect execution and get onto the back line. So it's once again Schalke's very strong team fighting and their early game coming together to allow them these successes. And the question is whether they can continue that throughout the split, whether they can continue this style, or whether people will start to find them out a little bit.
Yeah, and I do feel that they should be the favorites today versus XL. XL didn't have the best start to the season. They did play Rogue and Astralis. That Astralis game, you think, okay, this is the kind of team you should be able to beat. And versus Rogue, they weren't able to do anything because Rogue was pressuring them from so early on. What can be the game plan here for the side of XL versus Schalke, Vedius?
Well, I think that they should just stick to comfort for the time being. Right now, XL has really shown nothing. I think that they haven't really shown that much proactivity in the early game. Their drafts seem a little bit all over the place, and their execution just definitely is not at the level right now that they seem to be able to compete with even the teams around them at the bottom of the standing. So I think that Schalke don't need to do anything particularly special, and I think that they should just continue to set up Broken Blade for success, and hopefully we get to see a couple more pop-off plays from Nuclearint to keep building his confidence ahead of some harder matchups in the future.
And I will say for XL, there's a lot of sort of hyper carry AD carries available right now. We're seeing a lot of Cog, Lulu, Karma alongside that. You can put Xin Zhao in the jungle. I know Young Buck talked a lot about Dan being an aggressive jungler. And if you can get this combination of Patrick on something he can just hard carry on, and then a supportive lineup around him, maybe with another damage threat, then perhaps it could work. Obviously, it's difficult, but as you say, XL's drafts have kind of been a little bit all over the place recently. So maybe just resort to something that worked for you back in spring.
So you're telling me they have to do what we've loved, has always been like the advice for XL.
Make Patrick carry.
It's true.
Make Patrick carry.
Make Patrick the carry. We'll see what happens for XL. They want to pick up a win here in the last game of the week. They've had a tough start to the summer so far, but we'll see if they can rise up today as they kick things off alongside Schalke.